All right, if you read the Wall Street Journal on a regular basis, and if you don't, you should. It is my required daily reading every single day. You've no doubt seen some op-eds recently. I think there have been 3 or 4 recently written by our next speaker about what's going on with the FBI, their well-publicized problems. We're going to get some great insight on that today. Tom Baker is an international law enforcement consultant. He served as an FBI special agent for over 30 years in a variety of investigative and management positions facing the challenges of crime and terrorism. He has extensive experience with police management and training issues, having served as a management instructor at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. He has been published in many professional journals, nationally and internationally, and of course, as I just said, the Wall Street Journal. His international experience is extensive. He served as the legal attaché at the American Embassy in Canberra, Australia, where he was responsible for maintaining U.S. law enforcement interests in a large part of the Asia-Pacific area. He then was assigned as the legal attaché in Paris, where he developed expertise not only in Western Europe, but much of Africa as well. He's been closely involved in the planning and management of major events worldwide. He was the American representative to the Security Task Force for the Calgary Winter Olympics. In Paris, he was the senior U.S. law enforcement advisor to the planning and security management of the World Cup of Soccer. While in Canberra, he conceived and implemented the Pacific Training Initiative, a successful ongoing program to help the police of the Pacific Island nations. Tom holds a bachelor's degree from Fordham University and a master's degree in public administration from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. He and his wife, Anne, are here, both of them this weekend. We're so happy to have them up from Aspen, where they live. So let's give a warm Steamboat welcome to Tom Baker.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, which, confessing like my friend Melanie did, I wrote most of it. For the past 2 years or so, Americans have started to lose faith in the FBI, an institution that most Americans held in very high regard and I know is held in high regard around the world. I spent, as you know now, most of my adult life in the FBI, so this loss of faith really affects me and troubles me. And by the way, that was my first 7 seconds. How do you like me so far? I always listen to my friend Melanie. I think a lot of the explanation for the problems and the lapses that have happened can be explained by a cultural change that happened after the September 11th attacks. When America was attacked on September 11th, Bob Mueller, and by the way, his name is Mueller, not Mueller. He's not a Nazi. You may have your differences with him. It bugs me when the commentators on TV always pronounce his word as if it were Germanic. Bob Mueller is Mueller. Bob Mueller became director of the FBI only 5 days before the September 11th attack, which was on a Tuesday morning, as everybody remembers. On Saturday morning, he was summoned to Camp David. President Bush was at Camp David with his key advisors, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, the head of the CIA, and Bob Mueller was called there to report on what the FBI did. At least that's what he thought he was called there to do. And he showed up with a report, and he's told us this and told this to many audiences. He was exceedingly proud of what the FBI had done, because what the FBI did in just 3.5 days is what they do very well: investigate. And he came with a report to Camp David that Saturday morning after only 3.5 days, and this really is remarkable, and those of you who've been involved in things like this could realize it. The FBI had identified all 19 hijackers. their entire pedigree, their travel patterns, their financing, their associates, where they got in this country, where they rented cars, who gave them what, where they had been staying in 3.5 days. And he presented that with a great deal of pride. And Mueller is a very proud man. And at the end of this presentation, expecting, like I just got a little bit of here, praise and thanks, President Bush just looked at him and said, "I don't care about that. I want to know how you're going to prevent the next one." You can imagine how humiliated Mueller was. He came back, and now we know, for reasons that may have seemed justified at the time, he undertook to change the FBI into what he characterized later as an intelligence-driven organization. Now, this is significant. The FBI, almost from its beginning, did have a counterintelligence function inside the United States. But the culture of the FBI was always one of a law enforcement agency. And we were always taught that was one advantage America had, that our domestic intelligence agency is actually a law enforcement agency. That's not the case in Canada or in the United Kingdom or almost anywhere else in the world. So as a law enforcement agency, you operate into the confines of the Constitution and you have a certain mindset. A law enforcement agency culture is one of truth-seeking, truth-telling, fact-finding. In law enforcement, you have to find the facts, find the evidence, because at the end of the day, you have to stand up before a federal grand jury or in an open courtroom or before a judge or a magistrate and swear to tell the truth. But in an intelligence agency, they call it estimates, best guesses. And they operate by telling lies. And people in intelligence agencies who have had a career there will tell you this becomes a problem for them because they get used to telling lies. It just rolls off their lips. Now, as was mentioned in the introduction, I spent 12 years abroad at the end of my career in U.S. embassies, and I had to deal with various intelligence people on a fairly regular basis. And what I found, and it was the experience of the DEA attachés also and other legats around the world, we had a very difficult time with our counterparts because they lied to our hosts, and I was always assigned in an allied country. They lied to other people in the embassies, and they lied to us easily whenever it suited them. And in one post I was at, the chief of station, that's the head of the CIA in an embassy, the chief of station told me he had no problem lying to the ambassador. Now, to me, with my law enforcement mentality, that was just shocking. I mean, I just couldn't imagine lying to the ambassador, but this is what they do. And because of their different business model and because of the different way of doing things, they sometimes do get in trouble. Now, I'll give you one example of trouble. It's called circular reporting. And that happens to intelligence agencies when they get information from a contact or from an allied service, and then they hear it somewhere else. So they think they've gotten corroboration for that information. Now, sometimes a badly intended originator will deliberately do that, but often it's just through simple human error. You tell somebody something, the information gets passed around, and all of a sudden you have the Italians or the French or the British telling you the same thing, and you say, aha, this corroborates what we said, but it's really the same information. They just keep rephrasing it and rewording it. That happened in the Steele dossier, and it happened twice in the Steele dossier, and I know a lot of you follow the news in some detail. But the first thing in the Steele dossier, the dossier itself, was made up of a lot of circular reporting. And this has not been emphasized in a lot of the news. The information in the Steele dossier, he was reporting second and third information, and a redacted version of it is available online. But that same information had been flowing back and forth between some of Steele's friends. This fellow, Sidney Blumenthal, another guy, Jonathan Weiner, who works for the State Department. They had been exchanging these same second and third-hand stories amongst themselves for some time. So the dossier itself was made up of circular reporting. And then when the dossier was put in the affidavit for the FISA warrant, and this is now available online, the corroborating information was a news story was cited that provided the same information. But now we know, and we know from congressional testimony, that that information came from Steele. He told it to some reporters, and it wound up in some journalism. So circular reporting is a problem for intelligence agencies. It should not be a problem for a swear-to-tell-the-truth law enforcement agency, especially when you have to swear to a FISA warrant. But that's where we're at. Now, how do we get there? One of the first things Mueller did, he changed the management structure of part of the FBI in response to the September 11th attack. Traditionally in the FBI, cases are managed in the field. There's a case agent, there's this field supervisor, there's a special agent in charge. They review the information, then it goes to headquarters, and there's other levels of review and questioning and correction. What he did, he pulled the 9/11 investigations and related matters into headquarters. Then that was continued by Mueller and then Comey with the investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails and then the counterintelligence investigation of the Trump campaign. What did that do? Why is that so bad? What happened, you then had a very small group at the top of the FBI, and you've heard some of the names, Peter Strzok and McCabe, making all the decisions. Now, you know, in your own business, if you get the same 3 people in the room all the time, they're going to reinforce each other. We all need somebody to correct us. Even the journalists are here have editors who correct them. But when you have the same people, they just reinforce one another's opinion. There's not that levels of correction. The explanation you get, well, these are very sensitive political investigations. And just like the intelligence agencies in Virginia, they want to have politically sensitive people making the decisions on top. Well, in the past in the FBI, we had politically sensitive investigations. Some of you, I'm sure, can remember Abscam. Abscam was run in the traditional FBI way. It was run out of 2 field offices. That's where all the decisions were made. It was reported and reviewed by headquarters. In that investigation, using undercover operatives, 7 U.S. congressmen from both parties and 1 U.S. senator went to federal prison. You don't get things more politically sensitive than that. But this centralization, which is typical of an intelligence agency, is part of the reason things went off the track. And everybody acknowledges that things went off the track. FISA. There are 2 areas I can talk about that demonstrate this. One is FISA and one is the relations with Congress. FISA, and I know some of you probably know this in some detail, but some of you wonder, what does that word mean? Okay, FISA is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It came into effect in 1978, and the idea was it was a reform to introduce some regularity in the way intelligence was looked at and investigated inside the United States. There had been no guidelines for the FBI or anybody else. And it was decided definitively again in 1978 in all these reforms that the CIA and the NSA cannot operate inside the United States. They're forbidden to operate. So the FBI is the only intelligence agency that can operate inside the United States. So it's strictly defensive on the part of the FBI. So now here's something that's a secret, classified information, but almost everybody in this room knows it, and anyone who's ever read a book or read a newspaper knows it. But the American government very closely monitors 1 or 2 countries in particular. Now, wiretapping is illegal in the United States. How do they do that? That was the FISA Act. The point of the FISA Act was to provide a legal vehicle for the FBI to monitor our enemies or those we had suspicions about legally. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, other than regular criminal investigations, the information from that was never to be used in court. So you monitor a particular embassy, you get this information, and it's passed to the decision makers at the CIA, at the State Department, and the president himself. They get that information, and this has been going on for 40 years. It's never meant to be used in a court of law. Information from the FISA Act. It's not originally intended for that purpose. It also, under Judge Webster, and he became the director of the FBI in 1978 and served for 9 years and then served as director of the CIA, it was never intended to monitor Americans. Because if you suspect an American of being the agent of a foreign power, the appropriate way to monitor that American is using the Espionage Act, which is a criminal statute under Title 18. The FISA Act is under Title 50, two completely different things. If you suspect an American, you start an espionage case on them, the information you get from monitoring them under the Espionage Act can be used in court. In the past 3 decades, there have been over 70 successful espionage prosecutions of Americans. There's been only one that wasn't successful, actually. And the guy who told me that was John Martin, who ran that section of DOJ for a long time. That's the appropriate way to respond. But what happened in this thing, things got so far off the track that they started a FISA warrant, as we all know now, against this fellow Carter Page in October 2016, using the information in the Steele dossier to monitor this American citizen. It's like shocking. I mean, this could never get by under previous directors of the FBI. Relations with Congress. The CIA has had bad episodes over 40 or 50 years with Congress where they've lied to Congress. You're not supposed to lie to Congress. So they set up a group in Congress that you could tell secrets to, the Gang of Eight, and there are these people who are from both parties that have been cleared to get information. Briefly for 3 or 4 years in my career, I worked in the Office of Congressional and Public Affairs at FBI headquarters. The FBI always responded promptly to Congress. Under Director Louis Freeh, Judge Webster, we got things back to Congress. Yes, the most important people for us in Congress were the appropriation committees. They would give us our budgets, of course, and we got everything to them. But the House Intelligence Oversight Committee, the Senate Intelligence Oversight Committee, anybody asks something, you get it to them as quickly as possible. The situation that we have over the last 2 years where Congress is subpoenaing the FBI for information is like incomprehensible to most of us. That Congress would have to subpoena the FBI to get information. And then we now know, and this is well documented, a lot of the documents, Nunez in particular, the House Intelligence Oversight Committee wanted, they delayed for 6 and 9 months before getting it, and they still haven't provided an unredacted version of the communication from July 31st, 2016 that initiated the counterintelligence probe. So we still don't know the actual reason why that probe started. They've been holding that back. This, to me, it would be inconceivable that this would happen under past directors. It's just, and the Gang of Eight exists to get this kind of information. Now, Comey didn't even tell Congress that there was this counterintelligence investigation. Started on July 31st. It wasn't until March of 2017 when he was asked about it that he told Congress about this, and he said the reason he didn't tell them was that the case was too sensitive. But of course, that's the reason there is the Gang of Eight, to hear sensitive information. So the origin of that is still being held back. What do we do about this? It's a cultural problem. Some things have already been changed. We have a new director. We have a new deputy director. We have a new associate deputy director. Strzok is going to be fired. He's been taken out of everything. He's undergoing personnel actions right now. McCabe's been fired. McCabe may be prosecuted. We have the head of congressional affairs at the Bureau was fired. The chief of staff, he has a new chief of staff. That's a beginning. After the Inspector General report, Director Ray acknowledged there were problems. He's going to introduce training about bias, and he's appointed the new Associate Deputy Director, a fellow by the name of Paul A. Batt. And by the way, I know Paul A. Batt. I know people who know the new Deputy Director. Most people have a lot of confidence in them, so we can be helpful. But there has to be a cultural change. And since when I was a special agent, and when we went, the Constitution and the importance of following the Constitution was drilled into us repeatedly. But now in the FBI, you have a segment, about 2,000 people, since September 11th, a new position that's held in equal regard with the special agent position called intelligence analysts, IAs, just like they call the agents SAs, they call them IAs, intelligence analysts. But they don't get out, they don't meet people, they're never in a position, hardly, where they would have to swear to something in court or go before a judge or interview people or conduct a search or deprive people of their liberties. So they don't get the training that the special agents get in that regard. And I think they're going to have to get it. They're going to have to reinvigorate the attitude, change the culture, get us back to a law enforcement agency. We can still conduct counterintelligence operations, but with the mentality of law enforcement. Number one reform, no more FISA warrants on American citizens. That's just awful. And the FBI can do a lot about that internally. Congressman Nunes has said that's something he's going to look at after the next election, reform FISA. That has to be done. The FBI itself has to reform its relationships with Congress. Under Mueller, a lot of non-agent people were directly hired into key positions. One key position was the assistant director in charge of congressional relations. Mueller hired an outsider, might have been a nice person, I think he was a Republican, a state senator from the middle of the country, because they wanted a politician in there dealing with the congressman. Didn't work. Number one, he doesn't know the culture, he doesn't reflect the organization, and in fact, the congressman, they're looking to hear from the FBI. They don't want to hear from another politician who's been appointed as a go-between. In the past, we had special agents, most of them were attorneys, in that position running congressional relations. I think that's a specific personnel change that can and needs to be made. But the key thing is training, getting back to the Constitution. Judge William Webster used to tell us, and tell us repeatedly, and he repeated it in every speech, we have to do the job the American people expect of us, but we have to do it in the way the Constitution demands we do it. And that needs to be reiterated. Now, when I went through new agents training, and that's something I shouldn't say because in my day, but the fact is, this was a big thing. I'm not an attorney. About half the people in my class were attorneys. We got an awful lot over 14 weeks on constitutional law and federal criminal law. And I, of course, never having gone to law school, I found it fascinating. I enjoyed it, I loved it, I soaked it up like a sponge. Half of these other fellows had heard most of this before. But at the end, we had a legal instructor, and this went on for years. He would give us a gift, and the gift he gave us was this copy of the United States Constitution. And he told us to take it and put it in our breast pocket and keep it with us and always remember that's there. And when you're sitting in that interview room and when you're knocking on that door to exercise a search warrant, remember the Constitution and you'll never get in trouble. And a lot of us, and I did for a while, actually kept this Constitution with us close to our heart. It might sound like a simple thing or a corny thing, but I think they need to go back to giving out the Constitution and give it to those intelligence analysts who are sitting in the back room just making best guesses. I think at some point now, Phil's going to start asking me questions, or okay. Want me to move this away? Oh.
We would now like to welcome to the stage Philip Wegman. You met last night, our newest Tony Blankley Fellow. He's commentary writer for the for the Washington Examiner, and he is going to do an interview with Tom Baker. Welcome, Phil.
Okay.
Well, time is short, so I guess we'll just get started. Well, after listening to Mr. Baker speak, and after... Oh, I'm not on? Can you hear me now? Am I on now? Oh, wow, I am on now.
Now you're on.
Well, after listening to Agent Baker speak, I'm particularly grateful for your remarks, because, you know, for anyone who has been following the news for the last year and a half and anything that's related to the FBI or Russia, it can definitely make your head spin. So this has been more than helpful. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm particularly honored by being interviewed by an award winner, your first interview in your new position.
You're a little too kind. Well, first of all, because of your experience in the office of, in the FBI working with Congress, I wanted to ask you about their relationship with Congress post 9/11 and after the sort of culture shift that was put in place by Mueller. Do you think that the FBI has started to see themselves as a distinct agency that, for whatever reason, needs to be beyond the purview of Congress? Do you think that's a new sort of culture that's emerging there?
The beyond the purview of Congress is new, and this is a new problem. And as I say, it was unthinkable to us. It wasn't an issue that needed a subpoena. It was, how fast can you get them whatever they asked for? I mean, that's the way we were taught. But the FBI always has, and there's a virtue in this, thought of itself as a rather independent agency. And there were times when there was a little rub, you know, with the Department of Justice itself. But this difficulty is new, yes.
Along those same lines, what is your reaction, and then also what is the reaction of some of your more old school colleagues when you see, what the Deputy Assistant Director Peter Strzok was saying when he literally texted Lisa Page that these are his words, loathes Congress? Do you think that that is at risk of metastasizing and spreading throughout the ranks?
Well, what I think it's disgusting. And that's how a lot of us reacted to it. That whole series of texts, which again, that is available online too, including the second batch of them that the Inspector General found that initially couldn't be found. When you read those, if you have the stomach to read it, it's really disgusting. It's very clear that they were biased against Trump. I mean, there's no question about that, and that is actually why Bob Mueller removed him from the special counsel investigation. Remember, the FBI had its own counterintelligence investigation, which we could talk about maybe, and until well into 2017, when it was made taken over as the special counsel investigation. But other things in those texts, I mean, they go back and forth. The total lack of discipline, the total lack of character. They use horrible language, which is not blocked out. A lot of things are redacted. Talking about members of Congress who are concerned about unmasking of Americans. Talking about the working agents in the FBI in the field offices, the disdain they show for them, that they don't think strategically like we do. This is what they keep reinforcing. And their love affair with McCage, Strzok and Lisa Page, the three of them, that we're so wonderful and we know everything. And once again, it's people reinforcing each other. there was, this might seem to many people like a minor point, but I'm going to say it. When Janet Reno was Attorney General, she was Attorney General in 2001. There had been rules in the Department of Justice and in the FBI about the use of for personal reasons, government property, your cell phone, copying machines, whatever you can imagine. And as a lot of things were in the FBI, the punishment for these infractions were draconian. You really placed yourself in jeopardy. And Janet Reno came up with a rule, which was called the Reno Rule, that occasional or exceptional use of government property for personal reasons would incur no jeopardy. And what she had in mind was the situation which happens particularly in the FBI or the DEA, where people are out working late at night and they're supposed to pick up their kids from soccer, so they have to use the government phone or text on the government instrument to take care of this problem that came up. That's what she had in mind, and the people who enforced it in the FBI, that's how they viewed it. I'm sure Janet Reno never had in mind these, if you read them, these thousands of disgusting texts between these three characters. So that's another thing in the reform, by the way. We have to reinstitute the Reno Rule.
One of the things that I noticed that you didn't mention in your list of potential reforms, potential actions to be taken to clean up the FBI is something that in my world I heard a lot about. Just last month there was a push inside Congress. There was a impeachment petition that was introduced on the House floor, and it didn't go anywhere, but it was by a group of conservatives who thought that because the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, had been dragging his feet when he was supposed to be turning over some of this information, that he needed to get the boot. Do you think that we're at that point yet? And do you think that if it was to come to some sort of impeachment, that we would be jeopardizing any type of sources or information?
Well, that effort of that resolution, actually it was passed, the resolution, I think.
Yeah, it got out of committee.
It was to express Congress's displeasure at this foot-dragging, stonewalling, use whatever word you want, particularly as regards the origin of that counterintelligence investigation that began on July 31st. Now, as you know, I think, and some people here, I wrote an article about this just a little over a week ago in the Wall Street Journal, drawing on what a lot of people were telling me and a lot of people I was talking to. Why, and they have acknowledged this, that is the origin in that our originating communications being held back to protect sources. That's the reason, which is a legitimate reason. However, the Gang of Eight exists to hear those things. The Gang of Eight, I should explain, is a group in Congress, and this is a reform that happened about 30 years ago. It's 8 people. It's the majority and the minority leader in each house, and the chairman and the ranking minority member of the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee, and that adds up to 8 people. And they all have in-depth backgrounds, and they've all signed agreements and everything else. So they're supposed to be briefed on any particular ongoing sensitive investigation. And there's a quarterly briefing set up with both committees where they can be updated on what's going on. That's never been done, and this origin is still being withheld from them. This is really unheard of, and I know for a fact that inside the FBI right now there is a really big argument as to whether to reveal this last piece of information, which is going to be very embarrassing. And it's going to be embarrassing not just for the FBI. The origin of this investigation clearly goes back to the United Kingdom. And the other thing that's clear about the origin, and there was a very good piece in The Hill written by a fellow I know and have a great deal of respect for, Kevin Brock. He was the assistant director of the intelligence division until only about 2 years ago. To initiate a counterintelligence investigation, once again under these reforms going back to 1978, there was a protocol set up called the Attorney General Guidelines. And you had to have sufficient predicate information articulable facts in order to open a counterintelligence investigation. And there were additional stipulations if it was against an American or an American entity, American corporation, and in this case, Trump's campaign committee. Well, everybody looking at this, and a lot of stuff has come out, there's no way, by the standards we used to operate on, you can look at it and say that there was enough predicate to open an investigation. Former Director Comey, in his memoir that's out, he cites only this conversation that this fellow Papadopoulos had in London. When you go back and look at that and other things that have been revealed to Congress, Papadopoulos was relating a conversation that he had with an academic a month or two earlier in Britain, where that person told him they had dirt on Hillary Clinton. So Papadopoulos relates this to the Australian ambassador to London, in London at the time. And also you have Carter Page meeting with this other academic in England. And everything points back there. So the original information, most likely, we know now, came to the FBI from the CIA. We know that almost for a certainty. And former Director John Brennan has bragged that he drove the FBI to open this investigation. Right. He's bragged about that. He's acknowledged that. He said he gathered every scrap of intelligence he could get and passed to the FBI. So what he was getting was from the United Kingdom. Now, in the normal course of events, how that information would have or should have come to Brennan or come to the CIA was from one of 2 or 3 British intelligence organizations. And that still is the most likely explanation of what happened. But what is also the most dangerous and most embarrassing to the United States is that it didn't come from MI5 or MI6 in Britain, that it came directly from the CIA, that they were operating this fellow Halper and this other fellow Mitsov in the UK as what we would call informants. Mitsov's been identified in some press reporting as an FBI informant, which he may have become after July 31st. But he was in the UK in the spring talking to Carter Page and talking to Papadopoulos. Well, the FBI, it would be highly unusual for the FBI to be operating or maintaining an informant in the United Kingdom. It's far more likely, well, first of all, it's very likely that British intelligence would have been in touch with both of these people. They had been in the past because they were students, academics concerned with Russian matters. It's also, it makes it more likely, and we know that in the past at least one of them had worked with and for the CIA. So the dangerous thing here in the origin of the case is, it's bad enough if the information came from the British, as flimsy as it was, John Brennan passed it to the FBI, and there we go back to September 11th. The FBI in the past would have never, based on that, opened an investigation on an American entity. They wouldn't have opened it on your business for trading with the Russians based on that information. And if I can digress a little here, because it might be of interest to this audience, when Director Webster and Louis Freeh were directors, and I was present for 1 or 2 of these conversations, I heard about some from others. When the Bureau was about to start an investigation, often a criminal investigation, against a judge, a federal or a local judge, or against a member of Congress, you got this, whoa, boys, and come back in and let's talk about this one more time. And at the director level, they looked at, if you're going to investigate a judge, member of the judicial branch, or a member of Congress, the director, again, himself and his staff are going to look at this again before you embark on this investigation. Why? Because you're treading on the Constitution. You're investigating other co-equal branches of the government. So there was this extra pull when it involved public officials. And it should be that way. And we still went ahead with a lot of those investigations. But here, they went ahead. Why did they go ahead? Because there was some in the FBI after September 11 that thought a referral from the CIA was enough predicate to start an investigation. When you look at the facts of the referral, we don't think it is.
It definitely seems that President Trump is of the same opinion as you. I mean, earlier in May, he tweeted that Brennan started this entire debacle. And so tying it back to the FBI, do you think that one of the reasons why the FBI has dragged their feet in certain circumstances is because they are trying to avoid the embarrassment of showing that it was the CIA that pushed this forward?
Yes, and at a minimum, that's part of it. But the bigger embarrassment is this. If I can give you this other 30 seconds of background, and many of you may know this, but there's a long-standing agreement between the United States and Britain, and actually 5 nations in total, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. They call them the 5 Eyes, that we will never spy on their territory. The other half of that agreement with the CIA is they're the hand on the arm of the CIA. The CIA tasks MI5, MI6 really, to do things. They task ASIS, the Australian Security Intelligence Service, to do things. That's the agreement. We'll never do anything in Canada. The Canadians will do what, or consider doing what they're asked to do by the CIA or whoever, or the FBI in a counterintelligence investigation. The Canadians will usually do what we ask them to do, and vice versa. So it's ironclad with the United Kingdom, and it would be horribly embarrassing to the United States and to the CIA and to the leaders of MI5 and 6 in Britain if it came out that the CIA was directly operating these 2 individuals at this Cambridge Institute. If that comes out, that'll be very embarrassing and very devastating. And that's why they may be hiding the origin of the case.
We've only got a couple of minutes here. Quickly, I want to see if we can zero in on Brennan. I was looking back at Michael Isaacoff, the Yahoo News reporter who first broke the news that U.S. intelligence was probing the Trump campaign. He wrote a book in which he said that it was very clear, quote, that Brennan had an ulterior motive. We saw that Brennan, not only did he, refer this information, but he also had that meeting with Harry Reid where he briefed him on some of his suspicions. Do you see Brennan not just as an intelligence actor, but also as a political actor here?
Yeah, thank you, Phil. That's a key question. Because after the case was open on July 31st, 2016, that summer, Brennan then went, within weeks, to Harry Reid, who was then the Senate Minority Leader, and told Harry Reid that he had turned this case over to the FBI. And that's now seen by any observer as an effort to get the FBI moving on this counterintelligence investigation of the Trump election campaign. Brennan did that, and then because of that leak from Brennan, not leak, but briefing from Brennan, it leaked then to CNN that there was a case, and that apparently was the motive all along. Brennan now has been very open about his motivation, and he takes credit for having pushed this whole thing. So we're not exposing him, he exposed himself.
Very good. And then finally, with the last few minutes we have here, you brought out your pocket constitution a second ago, and it's very clear that the Department of Justice falls under the executive branch. Why don't we see President Trump, or would you prefer to see President Trump order the FBI and the CIA to turn over relevant information about the FISA warrant to Congress? Why doesn't he light a fire, or would that be preferable for him to light a fire in their interactions with Congress?
Well, that's a judgment call of the president, because that's a political call too. I mean, legally he has that authority, there's no question about that. But how politically that would go over, he and his advisors will make a judgment on that.
Very good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Great job, Phil. All right, thank you, Tom Baker and Phil Wegman. That was a very enlightening discussion. We would like to move right on into our next panel so that we can stay on time. Given the concerns with school safety and keeping our kids safe. We have put together a panel that can address these issues and provide some concrete ideas for improving school safety and keeping our kids safe.